And one of the exercises that organization's been going through is we call our network of the future, right? And that's, hey, as we've built, especially our U.S. operations over time, there was organic growth, right? But if you kind of then look at the building configuration that we have, the volume going to the network today, in our small package operations, you actually wouldn't have designed it that way, right? So there's been some work on reconsolidation down, actually reducing the footprint. But then part of that exercise too becomes how do you start to future-proof as well? So even when we're looking at our buildings, hey, we don't necessarily have some robotics in today, but okay, we think in the next, 5, 10 years, some of these things will become more viable. How do you design your building up front to be ready for that? Yep. Otherwise, hey, you got to go rebuild again, right, in 15 years' time. And that's where, I think with the rapid pace of change, right, you have to be thinking about that constantly now. And right now, the future's always faster than we think.
All right, Mission Control has said we're ready to go. My name is James Marlow. I'm the president and CEO of Southface Institute, a 47-year-old nonprofit based here in Atlanta. And I'm really happy to be with y'all today. We have a very distinguished panel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a couple of quick opening remarks, and then I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves for them to talk for the maximum amount of time. We have 4 incredible speakers today, and I'm going to start by telling you the number one problem in the world today. You can go home tonight and go, I learned the number one problem in the world today. The number one problem in the world today is a maniacal pursuit of daily short-term profits. Yes. Nothing wrong with profit. I'm a capitalist, I'm a conscious capitalist, but we need to think long-term. We need to think about value. We need to think about business value. So another component to that is I always like a really good quote, and I got this one this week, and that's one of the best ones I've seen in months. So this is from Stephen Covey, and he says, the abundance mentality flows out of a deep inner sense of personal worth and security. It is the paradigm that there is plenty out there and enough to spare for everybody. So we are in a scarcity mindset right now, and we have to strive and make a daily profit, and we have to do all these things. What I'm going to encourage us to do, and at Southface, we often talk about 100-year thinking. We're thinking about systems thinking. The old English phrase of don't be penny wise and pound foolish. We seem to make so many short-term based decisions that actually cost us a lot more in the long run. So I'm going to give you some quotes from this radical dude named Warren Buffett. All right, so he's only the premier investor in history. I mean, nobody's got a better track record than Warren. Number one, he says, it's far better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price than buy a fair company at a wonderful price. So the focus on price, the focus on cost. We could say that another way about buildings. So we're talking a lot about the built environment today. Southface, we live and work on the built environment and energy. It's far better to buy a wonderful building at a fair price than a fair building at a wonderful price. The second one is our favorite holding period is forever. So thinking long-term, being that long-term thinker. And then this is the best one. Price is what you pay. Value is what you get. So what we're trying to do is think about a narrative to talk to nobody that's at this conference, because you all get this. But there are so many boardrooms, there are so many CFOs, and there are so many accountants and people thinking only about the financials that are not thinking about the long term. And they need to be thinking about long-term profits, long-term business value, long-term quality. One of my favorite quotes that exemplifies this in the built environment is JLL. Their research says it costs 2% more in North America to build a high-performance building. So you're going to get savings every year for the life of that building. Most buildings in America are going to last 30 to 50 years. In Europe, they might last 1,000. So long-term thinking, systems thinking. Some of the topics we're going to be diving into here around building optimization. So not just cutting costs, but life cycle cost analysis versus first cost. I think our maniacal focus on first cost is really evil. So increasing revenue and savings, decreasing consumption of energy, water to reduce cost, using operations and maintenance to reduce maintenance costs, and extend the life of buildings and equipment. Compliance, there's savings. We may hear a story about a project in Washington, D.C. that with compliance, they saved $4 million in not paying penalties. And then really business continuity after storms. So in Augusta, Georgia, I don't know if any of y'all watched the Masters on Sunday. It was really good. If you didn't, it was probably one of the best matches I've ever seen. The Augusta Nationals golf course is different now because of Helene, a hurricane that hit Augusta, Georgia. And I grew up right outside of Augusta. There's a chainsaw running right now still cutting up trees. And they are still working 7 days a week in Columbia County and in Richmond County. And literally millions of trees were destroyed completely, and most of those were not harvested. So we're going to talk about long-term value. So Becca, why don't you start it and introduce yourself, and if you have any opening statement, just make a couple opening comments.
Perfect. Thrilled to be here and thrilled to dive in on this interdisciplinary. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. I'm Becca Timms, and for the last 12 plus years, I've served as Jamestown's Director of Sustainability and ESG. Jamestown is a global vertically integrated investment management company. And throughout my time at Jamestown, I was really focused on establishing our baseline from the you can't manage what you don't measure perspective. I started that back in 2012. It finally got good enough to use in 2014. Since then, I've been really focused on narrowing the gap between the boxes that we have to check, which I'll talk more about, and the things that actually drive impact or drive value. Just recently, I've transitioned away from Jamestown, so this is my first official engagement in my new consulting advisory capacity, which I really did because I want to be able to work more on a more interdisciplinary basis with these partners beyond multi-tenant commercial real estate. I think these are problems that are going to require a lot of collaboration, and that's where I'm excited to focus my work.
So at Jamestown, which of course Ponce City Market, which we love and enjoy very much, adaptive reuse, really creative spaces, really engaging with the community, new mass timber building, which if you're not into mass timber, taking 2x4s and 2x6s and laminating together to make beams, make buildings out of Georgia growing southern yellow pine. So there's some really cool stuff going on there. So
I think it's an interesting innovation story that also ties back to a financial story. So I'm excited to dive into it.
okay, all right, let's go down the line. Take it away.
Yeah, so nice to meet you all. Zach Marchlik, Vice President of Sustainability at UPS. I get to wear two hats for the organization, one being leading our decarbonization efforts. So how do we go accomplish the goals that we've set as an organization? And then also working kind of across the value chain and stakeholder chain through what we call our engagement pillar. So a lot of times spent with our customers, right? How do we look at meeting their needs to us from a sustainability perspective? Because from a logistics standpoint, right, our emissions are our customers' emissions. When you think about us, right, you're probably like, hey, conversation on the built environment, UPS, I'm thinking brown trucks and planes. Where do you guys fit into that equation? For us, we have about 2,400 buildings and facilities that we operate around the globe. You have our traditional core business offerings around small package, which you're all very familiar with, but one of the other places that we've leaned into pretty heavily is in the healthcare space. So when you think about that, healthcare logistics and distribution, right, there's a pretty big footprint that we have and continue to grow around the cold chain. And for customers that are using our facilities there, there's a lot of focus on, hey, how can you guys reduce your emissions in that space? And then what we try to do is go find where's their business value to drive from that. And we think about that from a compliance perspective with regulations coming out around the globe, but also looking at it from a competitive advantage standpoint. How can we tell our customers what their emissions are and give them opportunities to reduce their emissions and partner with us? Right, and we think and we know, right, that can create a stickier value proposition than some other players in the market.
How many buildings in the U.S.?
In probably the core small package operations, it's over 1,200. Within our logistics and distribution businesses, I don't have that exact number off the top of my head, but I would assume well over 100.
And what number airline are you?
From a cargo perspective, we'd argue we're 1-2, right, depending upon how you look at it. We have about 300 aircraft that we own and then another 250 or so that we charter and lease around the globe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I happen to love Brown. They bring those nice packages to you.
Hopefully everything in the box, not damaged.
Incredible operational excellence.
Yeah, that's core to the business.
And the staff and the people, so it's great to be with you today. Thank
Absolutely.
All right, Gareth, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Gareth, CEO and founder of VECKTA. VECKTA, we support commercial industrial businesses to own their power. I've spent the last 20 years supporting businesses around the world to realize their energy objectives. And this has ranged from Canada, Australia, Middle East, and now the US. Our technology platform helps customers go from we think we want to do something to understanding where does on-site energy make sense, what should we build, why should we build it, how do we communicate the value to all of our stakeholders in the business, and then how do we get competitive quotes from the best developers in the market to go and deploy these systems at scale to realize profitable and sustainable outcomes. It's all about inspiring business leaders to be able to act with confidence and putting them in the driver's seat versus being sold to by people in the market. And the primary objective for this is we are all passive consumers of energy today. We heard that on the first panel this morning. How do we shift the mindset to realizing the maximum value out of our real estate and our built environment and being active energy participants versus being at the mercy of someone else generating and providing our power for us.
Okay, now I'm not going to let you off the hook. You got to explain the accent. I don't think you're from around here.
Yeah, originally from Liverpool, England. Had the pleasure and privilege to, after university, I moved to Canada. Got into environmental science there, supported the oil and gas industry to clean up old oil and gas well sites. And that actually took me off to Iraq. And I spent 2 years in Iraq supporting the oil and gas industry to move in after the Gulf War. So I've seen firsthand what happens when you don't have access to reliable power. The local population was surviving on 2 hours of power a day, 120 degree temperature days. People were mortar attacking our base every evening. These were not insurgents, they were people trying to put food on the table and diesel in their generators. And on the flip side of that, I saw the lengths we are willing to go to provide energy to fuel our economy. And instead of extracting oil and gas from weird and wonderful places around the world, we can generate it right at our facilities through solar, through batteries, through wind, through fuel cells, through gas turbines, and we can do it in really efficient and sustainable ways instead of relying, like as we're all seeing in the press right now, energy sovereignty is absolutely key.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tommy, tell us about some buildings.
Awesome, everybody. I'm Tommy Bledsoe. I'm with CBRE, and I'm also here with two of my teammates, Anaya and Liz. So we are on the Sustainability Services team in property management at CBRE. CBRE is the world's largest commercial real estate services firm, and our team supports all of our U.S. property management clients. So that's about 4,000 buildings around the country, and we support our Sustainability Services program. So what that looks like, CBRE has made a lot of investments in sustainability in the last several years, in particular in putting our team together. And so we help all of our property management teams upskill and learn about sustainability. We help them fulfill a standard level of sustainability scope as part of their property management operations, which really revolves around just collecting their property's data, reporting it, benchmarking it, being compliant with local regulations. And then we also offer a specialist level of services, which is where I work at, for clients who have more complex goals that they're trying to hit, who have targets for decarbonization and green certifications and things like that for their funds. So I'm a senior sustainability specialist, and I lead our services program for the Eastern U.S. So that's kind of everything, we drew a line down the middle of the country. So that's everything from St. Louis and Chicago all the way over to the Eastern Seaboard.
Okay, thank you, Tommy. Thanks for those intros. In working in solar for the past 15 years or so, working in sustainability, the most common response I get of why people don't do sustainability is it's too expensive. And typically that's an obvious statement about first cost, because they're not really doing life cycle costing analysis or environmental impact analysis. How do we get people to think about lifetime cost, about true cost, about true value versus this first cost delivery?
I mean, this is the crux of change management, I think. And I think, speaking from the client side, I would always put the onus on the vendors to start with, right? I would say, why don't you help make this pitch for me? And really looked at my role as kind of an extension of any external sales team, like someone that happened to know a lot about the client. So in my example, it ended up kind of shifting us to an entirely different project model for solar, because we ultimately decided that we weren't willing at that time to take on any first cost. So that was really the direction that we needed. But I would say regardless, I think training your teams to ask the question is a reasonable and also a free starting point.
Right. Good point.
You might not always get the answer.
Yeah, I mean, in power purchase agreements, no upfront cost, no operating or maintenance costs, so no CapEx, no OpEx. That would be a SEPA, if you're here in Georgia, a solar energy procurement agreement, because utilities want us to be really confused. But, so using alternate financing and alternate business structures. People are also doing that with water, so water services agreements. We're seeing, obviously, ESCOs are people that will upgrade HVAC equipment or make building enhancements on a shared savings model. How does UPS approach this? What's your decision process?
Yeah, we really think about it, right, kind of through two lenses. One is, right, how do you go reduce, right, usage? And sometimes, right, there's capital up front to go put in. For us, right, we have a pretty strong credit rating, pretty strong balance sheet. So for us, it's usually hard to get over our internal cost of financing relative to third-party players. And then once you look beyond that, where can you then look at opportunities to either generate revenue or offset your costs, right? Where on-site solar starts to come into play. The way that we like to think about it is you kind of have to look at it across the portfolio, right? So for us, right, I mentioned, right, we've got 1,200 plus buildings in the U.S. Some are going to be good, some are going to be not so good, right? So you want to go after the low-hanging fruit, and then the way I like to think about it, right, you kind of run it like a private equity style fund, right? Now, getting that alignment internally is sometimes a little painful because that's not how usually corporations like to think, right? Every single thing they have to look at one by one. But if you go, okay, I can do these 5 things, they have a payback of 3 years and then generate positive cash flow after that. Now you can start to make the argument that, well, that next one on the list doesn't have the same return profile, but I've already brought this much value to the organization, right? So now look at that next layer. And then where are the new opportunities coming in? Technology improves, so the yields might be better in the future. And so you're in a constant evaluation process to look for where are there opportunities today, and then where can there be opportunities tomorrow. And there's an ever-shifting regulatory landscape out there with new programs that come online that then challenge us and our people working with partners outside the company to identify new opportunities. Like one of the things that we've been kind of looking at recently is some community solar programs where actually we wouldn't build and own the assets on our roofs, but potentially provide a rooftop lease. Very different, right, kind of experience and exposure for us as a company, but you go, hey, this thing seems to pencil out pretty good. Getting back to the change management piece, right, I got to go convince the real estate folks and the tax folks and all those people that we're not completely crazy.
Do you find that every leader of those different business units sometimes has different concerns? Or I'm curious how the internal education has gone.
I think it's newness, right? Yeah. So what you always find is, okay, tell me the 5 problems that you see with what we're putting on the table today. And then you get through those 5 problems, and then they go, oh, there's 5 more. And you go, well, hold on, I thought we solved the 5, right? And that's when you quickly, I've come to realize, right, that means that it's just something new, right? So people are getting uncomfortable. And ultimately, if something goes sideways, right, your general rule of thumb that I always had, which I learned from a mentor early on in my career, is who gets the phone call, right? So if a real estate deal goes sideways, they're going to call the real estate person. They're not going to call the sustainability person who made the advocation, right, to go do that sort of project. Yeah. And so you have to be aware of that, right? And then it's building consensus top down from a decision-making process. Because if you're trying to hit, well, at least how our company works, right, is I consider us culture-wise a hierarchical militaristic organization. That's probably the best way to describe it. I'm not joking, right? And if you think about it, right, they always say, right, tactics win battles, logistics win wars, right? From a military perspective. So that's the same mentality of a company like ours to make sure that the package gets there on time as it needs to be, and you have butterfly effect when you start to screw that stuff up. So what that means is you got to figure out who those true decision makers are. Get the buy-in on the rationale for the approach. Here's what we're trying to solve for. Hey, what concerns do you have? Because if you try to work your way up through the organization, each one of those people are going to go, this is new, it's not on my priority list, I don't want to do it, I don't have enough time, my resources have been cut, right, I got 15 other things that I want to go solve for. So for us, a lot of the time it's, okay, where do we find an opportunity, get buy-in within our leadership team, work up, down, and across in order to get things done.
You are like the Army. So one thing I've learned over 40 years of business is Americans will never tell you they don't understand something. And only the smartest people that you deal with will ask really good questions. I mean, it's Ted Lasso. You got to be curious. Don't be judgmental. How do we get people to ask those questions and not just say it's too expensive? Because most, in the boardroom, I spent a lot of time in boardrooms in my career, they'll just say, well, it's just too expensive. We need a 24-month payback. It's the worst bullshit thing I've ever heard. It's like, almost none of your decisions give you a 24-month payback. So how do we present information that would go through that command and control structure of yours to get the yes?
Yeah, we hook it back to the strategy of the organization. So for us, what I always like to think about, and before I moved over to sustainability, I spent time in our corporate strategy group, right? So you go, okay, where is the organization heading? Who are the customers, right, that you want to go penetrate and solve for? Okay, what do those customers want to solve for? Okay, does this now help us in our storytelling with those customers based off of those customer needs and align to the growth trajectory of the company? When you start to sync those things up, people start to nod their heads a little bit more. If you go, hey, I'm trying to solve for this thing over here, and you can't really connect this to those three things that they really care about, then that's where the disconnect occurs. So for us, this healthcare component, it simplifies the conversation a little bit. Hey, if you want to go win more healthcare business, hey, here's the amount of healthcare customers out there that have science-based targets, and they have decarbonization commitments, and they have logistics and transportation decarbonization commitments. Okay, we think that this can go help us, but then we also go spend time with our sales team and go talk to the customers themselves. So then you get that real feedback, right? Because there's always that disconnect, right, organizationally, and that helps to say, well, I've talked with these 15 customers who represent this much money in the funnel. This is all important to all of them. Okay, right, that's a lot harder to argue against. It's not easy stuff, right? But you start to get that alignment, and so we just look at different kind of value levers within that. The other piece that we've talked about, it's hard to put a value on, right, is just talent acquisition over time, right? So I think folks have talked about it on the main stage. Hey, if you want to recruit the best and brightest of the next generation, and if they don't think that you care about this sort of stuff, they're not as likely to join your organization. So to your point, you have to get out of 3-month thinking into 10 to 20-year thinking, right? When you do that, then you can start to build the case, right, around value. And then sometimes it's don't go too big and too wide and too broad. Here's the thesis. Let's go prove one out, right? It's a centralized, a contained blast area, as I like to call it, right? Contain the blast. Let's go solve within that. Can we drive value? Or what are the 10 things that we have to go solve for organizationally that says this is going to be challenging? So for us, like on-site solar, that's not core to our business, right? Like our engineers are not set up to know maintaining and building and operating solar facilities. So that then generates a conversation of, hey, do we need to go partner with some better folks externally to go help solve that and de-risk that for the organization, because we're not going to resource for that over time. So there's also then a big focus on what are we core at? Let's stay focused on core. Where can we generate additional value? But then in that case, sometimes we'll give some of that value away so that we can tap into other folks' core expertise.
I think, James, the key is to tie it back to things that people understand. And I think if you look at the landscape right now, the power grid just got a D+ rating. So the infrastructure is 50 to 100 years old. It's failing us. Energy costs across the country have gone up 22% in the last 4 years. Where I'm based in California, 70%. The economy loses $150 billion a year as a result of power outages. The companies that invest well in sustainability realize 20% more sales, increase their stock price by 6%, grow their sales and customer retention by 20%, retain their employees by 50%. If you actually speak in that language to business leaders and demonstrate the upside value, and then really hone in on those high impact opportunities and get those quick wins and show people, here's what you can achieve. And then you start realizing that compounding effect that you spoke about, Zach, of you invest in one on-site solar or battery system. We're now seeing these systems paying back in 1 to 3 years in the best places in the country. The key is to identify where are those places. Let's get the quick wins. Let's take the cost savings. Let's reinvest into the next project. And the net investment actually becomes really minimal in the grand scheme of things. And that compounding impact really then starts getting people excited, and it starts breeding that we want to do more because we're saving money, our power's always on, we're reducing our emissions, our brand's better, and suddenly you're positioned in the market to win versus just competing in terms of cost cutting and laying people off and all the other things that we typically do as businesses to manage costs.
Thank you. Tommy, what do you think?
Yeah, I would add, we do a lot of, CBRE does a lot of research on the real estate market and trends for clients, and then try to arm everybody internally with what they're seeing, at a macro level. So there's a couple of really interesting studies that we've done in the last few years. One of them looks at, it was done last year, and it looks at all of the American office occupier clients of CBRE. So the occupier, I mean corporations who are tenants in office buildings, or they own their office building and they work out of it. So companies. So they surveyed, thousands of companies around the country, and this was back in last year, and found that when they asked them what are the most desirable amenities that you're seeking in an office building, sustainable operations and features was cited by 66% of the respondents, and that was more than any other amenity in an office building. And we're talking about, like, the list was things that you would typically find in an office: having a gym, having parking, having the on-site food, all that kind of stuff. So I think the next highest feature was in the 40 percentile or so. So it was a significant jump that cited that. So we do a lot of work talking with building owners, and going back to James, your question about how do we get to long-term thinking, we try to explain to them that there's kind of a race to quality going on, and sustainability is one of the levers you can pull. That if you're investing in your buildings in sustainability, you're going to likely see over the long term higher value for your building. Even if you intend to sell that building someday, you're avoiding the risk of not doing it and having other peer properties do it, and potentially losing out on tenants who want to go to buildings that are more invested in sustainability, but also you're going to be able to sell that building at a higher value. We've also seen that in rental rates. So
I'm going to reiterate that. Sell that building at a higher valuation, at a higher value.
Correct, yeah. And part of the reason...
What does the data tell us on that?
Like how much higher?
Is there any rule of thumb?
It varies a lot if you look at different studies, but I'll give you an example of another data point that's in that case. So the way that buildings drive value and that it's valuable for an owner is they want to have a higher net operating income, which is either cutting the cost of the building or getting more revenue, and revenue comes from having the building leased, having tenants. So we did a study of LEED certified buildings across the US, trying to isolate out what's the impact of getting your building LEED certified on the rent that you can charge to a tenant. So they found that LEED certified buildings on average generate 30% higher rental incomes than properties that are not. But from there, you've got to continue to isolate out variables, because LEED certified buildings, they also tend to be newer buildings. They're nicer anyway with better amenities. They're in nice parts of town, things like that too. So if you strip out all those variables and just focus purely, a regression analysis on the LEED certification, it's about a 4% rental premium still. So just that alone can help you charge more rent, which again makes your building more attractive down the road if you try to go sell it.
Yeah.
You want to say
Well,
that?
yeah, and it's like I love stats like this, and when I started my career, it was like, okay, what is the value of this green premium, right? Like if we're assuming we're paying more, what's that worth? And the biggest shift that I've seen, and this really started with local benchmarking and transparency standards, and now performance standards, which for those that aren't familiar, there's a great map on the IMT.org website that shows all of the jurisdictions where buildings are required to meet performance standards related to energy and carbon. And now all of a sudden, in addition to this like green premium, which I think the data increasingly is supportive of, there's a cost of not doing these things. And that cost is not just the $4 million. And I don't know if now is like a good time to go into that. Okay, so I'm talking about a large commercial building, commercial office building in DC, and given the DC requirements, it's called the Building Energy Performance Standard, BEPS. All buildings over a certain size have to meet certain energy performance, or else, right? Or else you'll have to start paying fines, or else you'll end up on a bad list. But the reality, and a lot of whiny owners will tell you this, is that all of our buildings are special snowflakes. I mean, they're full of like hardworking attorneys that are supporting, you know, other continents and working 24/7. Owners make a lot of money off of that overtime HVAC, so sometimes these economic, like sometimes more money than we could make from saving that energy. And so what we were able to do was actually model the fine potential, go to the tenant and say, you know, with the combination of a lot of engineering, so your technical services, your business planning, you know, when do these leases turn over, what is this tenant's plan on taking more space, we were basically able to get the right information at the right time and take advantage of some construction that they were doing. We replaced 200 DAV boxes, the tenant spent like $2 million, and we were able to improve our Energy Star score by something like, it was between 18 and 30 points. It was a lot. It was enough to where the engineers were questioning whether or not there had been a calculation error. And that was work that we never would have been able to do had we waited. A, because the space wouldn't have been under construction, the roof, you know, would have been in place, so we wouldn't have been able to have that disruption. But that took the sustainability person, that took asset management, that took third-party engineers, that took attorneys. I mean, it really took an ecosystem to get that done. And had we waited, we probably would have been caught on our heels and not able to make that move. And so that's an example that I like to give because we've ended up with a happy tenant. They've got multiple offices. They're spending less money, even if they are working, you know, 25/7. And we're not getting fines. So that to me was a win.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, you mentioned building performance, we have certifications. So tell me what each of you think about the current state of certification. At Southface, we have a standard called Earthcraft, which is a regional standard which takes into account the heat, cold, and humidity of the Southeast. We've trained more lead APs than almost any other training organization in the Southeast. So I find a lot of certification fatigue, and a lot of people are saying, well, we used to do lead, we don't do lead anymore. Architects will tell me, we recommended Earthcraft, but the client said no. What is the current state of certifications in your view?
I'll say two things. I think they're a great roadmap at the building level or even at the portfolio level if we're talking about GRES or some of the more kind of corporate tools. I think it's a great roadmap and framework. I also think it helps with the assurance and the quality that this stuff is actually getting done. I think what we need to watch is with these rapid advancements in technology and AI, my gut is that the sustainability consulting community and like the how the work gets done, how much it costs to get it done is going to change a lot. I think it should change a lot and hopefully free up our time for some higher and better uses than like lead credit documentation.
So does Jamestown have minimum standards? Or they?
Yeah, so Jamestown it considers a certification, whether it be LEED or something like more specific to a shopping center. So we consider it for all projects and pursue it, really dependent on the fund, the investor. But what I tell people is like, you can run, but you can't hide. And I don't mean to sound threatening, but I've never regretted doing something because the tenants, the lenders, the investors, they all have their own requirements. So whether or not you're doing it, you're going to get asked about it eventually. And so I would say, you know, get your story straight. And if the answer is no, be prepared to explain why, and be prepared to talk about what you might be doing or what you might be exploring. That's my 2 cents.
Okay. What is UPS's take?
Yeah, I think we give flexibility, right? Because we have different operations, different geographies. When you think about our building uses, right, very different use cases and even right technology inside of them. So you go to your right kind of lowest automation building, you got a single belt in a center, probably in Opelika, right, Alabama, right, to do deliveries, versus a healthcare logistics and distribution facility. So that's where we look across the entire portfolio. We give flexibility to the businesses based off of right kind of the needs of those buildings, and then ultimately what's going to drive value. So from my perspective, not as close on the building side of the equation, but kind of in general for us from a sustainability perspective, there's a dime a dozen, and then it comes into right cost of accreditation and maintaining those things. Okay, how much cost does that start to incur relative to value driven, right? So there's a bit of a balancing act, and what we find is with some different standards over time, right, they kind of shift over time, which that creates challenges, right? Especially when you're looking at some assets that we operate 40, 50 years. So it becomes a balancing act for sure.
I'm
Yeah.
glad you said you operate assets 40, 50 years. So once again, that longer term thinking, that longer term value, paying a little more on the front end can reap benefits for those next decades.
Yeah, and one of the exercises that organization's been going through is we call our network of the future, right? And that's, hey, as we've built, especially our U.S. operations over time, there's organic growth, right? But if you kind of then look at the building configuration that we have, the volume going through the network today, in our small package operations, you actually wouldn't have designed it that way, right? So there's been some work on reconsolidation down, actually reducing the footprint, but then part of that exercise too becomes how do you start to future-proof as well? So even when we're looking at our buildings, hey, we don't necessarily have some robotics in today, but okay, we think in the next, 5, 10 years, some of these things will become more viable. How do you design your building up front to be ready for that?
Yeah.
Otherwise, hey, you got to go rebuild again, right, in 15 years' time. And that's where, I think with the rapid pace of change, right, you have to be thinking about that constantly now. And the future's always faster than we think, today's day.
Yeah. Gareth, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's no certification for on-site energy per se, but we as an organization now have looked at 23,000 facilities around the world, and we've built a VECKTA score mechanism where any property with a score of more than 70 is a slam dunk project. It should be deployed imminently because it's got amazing returns on investment, great IRR, great emission reduction, or it's in a high outage area. So I think we'll see that starting to standardize across organizations. What we are seeing from a certification process is customers driving it internally. Walmart came up with the Gigaton program. This is both a carrot and a stick of, if you are a supplier who is helping reduce your emissions, manage your costs, you'll get more business and we'll get you more contracts. People who don't act won't. And so I think we're seeing more and more organizations managing their scope 3 by pushing down these mandates in their own sort of internal contracts. We've got Automaker, a car dealership customer, and they're using it to say to their dealers, those that act and can demonstrate you've achieved X, Y, and Z will get first dibs on electric vehicles or EV charging infrastructure. And so I think that's more of what we'll see in the industry is maybe less official standardized certifications and more companies using it to drive the right behaviors across their supply chain and ecosystem.
Yeah, we don't endorse any one certification, but we do try to support our clients to get any that we can. So we have teams internally that can facilitate like LEED certifications, WELL certifications, the other major ones you see like Fitwell and BREEAM and others. So we can help them get the certification, and then we also we try to do kind of above and beyond to raise awareness to our property teams to help them even know that they could get a certification. So the big one I'm thinking of is Energy Star certification. That is personally my favorite because it is a low-cost certification and it's very straightforward. If your building is in the top 25% of buildings from an energy standpoint nationwide, you can get this certification. And so we just did a campaign internally to identify our buildings that are at the threshold and to communicate to them and let them know you go for this certification. So trying to raise awareness of it. Another example, actually, we're doing with a team from Georgia Tech right now. We have a student group that we're working with to help build a tool for us to be able to identify properties that are good candidates for the WELL certification. And so same concept, if we can look at what we know about the buildings just right now based on internal data, can we identify who's a good candidate for that and then reach out to those property teams and try to encourage them to go for that certification too.
I have another add-on, and I think it's maybe because our work is so closely aligned, but I feel like the data to me is like such a critical piece of this. And, I think what I'm seeing, and like if I were to have, like a magic wand, I think the quality of data that transacts with a building is about to change a lot. And so, when we used to buy buildings 8 years ago, most of them, for example, didn't have an Energy Star account. And now it's like less common in the institutional world. But I think there is a future where the type of data that helps to execute these projects really becomes part of the building package. So it's not like a 300-page PCA that might have been copy-pasted and might talk about a chiller that's not even on the rooftop of the actual building. I mean, there's a bunch of garbage out there. But I think like this data package that really can help diagnose and plan for some of these improvements. I mean, I don't know, Gareth, I feel like for VECKTA, like that's kind of the holy grail, right? Is when if clients had it together on the front end, it makes that like matchmaking and like diagnostic phase a lot shorter.
Yeah. And the key is to remove the data need from the customer. You know, what we have learned on this process is our original platform was plug in all these parameters, plug in all this data, and we'll tell you what configuration of technologies make sense for your business.
Yeah.
Customers don't have access to that. A lot of the time they don't even know where their facilities
It's kind of
are.
paralyzing, right? Yeah.
And so with just an address, we're able to provide those insights, and then the more data you can feed in, the more accurate it gets. And then you can connect to developers in the market, the right developers to have it built. But I think you're right in terms of transactions as well in the future. If you can show up with, we've assessed our portfolio, here's the potential cost savings, here's the profitability. And I love your statement before about growing revenue. There's like revenue hidden in plain sight, you know, in terms of property owners, they are leasing the inside of the box today. Why not lease the roof? Why not lease the car park and start generating a new revenue stream? Because then that feeds into the NOI, then that feeds into your balance sheet because you can multiply that by the cap rate.
Yeah, to that end, we have a lot of properties reach out about solar and about EV charging, and the first conversation I always have with them is, does your owner know how they finance the project? Because that significantly impacts, you know, the trajectory of where this is going to go. But, you know, if there's a lot of models out there, it's kind of a continuum, and they could pay for the solar or the chargers themselves outright and own it, and then make a decision on whether to monetize and charge their tenants for it or not. Or they could have a company come in and install it for them, and the company owns the chargers or the panels, but they'll pay a payment for the space as well. Yeah. So it's just another revenue stream for buildings for sure. Yeah. A lot of times they don't know, so then we'll connect them to somebody who can help consult with them and figure out the right path for the building.
And it's free money. You know, we were talking before about, you know, there's companies that they need to replace their roof and they don't want to spend all that money on a roof replacement. You can actually go to market and have someone come out and then lease your roof for the solar install, but as part of the process, they'll give you a brand new roof. So like, how can you get these win-win-wins and start stacking the value and making sure that everyone comes out ahead?
One thing I want to add, Becca, to what you were saying about making sustainability data kind of core to your building data. A couple examples of where we've seen this. We have some clients who are institutional investors in particular, so big, you know, funds of properties that anybody could invest in. And more we're seeing them basically when they go to acquire a property, do a sustainability assessment as part of that due diligence process. So same way when you go to buy a house, you have a due diligence period. When they're acquiring a new building, they'll have this sustainability team basically run an assessment of the physical potential risks facing the building, the regulatory risk, the building performance standards. Also, what can we learn, you know, externally? Is the building, does it have a green certification, things like that, and come up with like a monetary value of the risk around the building to factor into their investment committee's decision.
I think that's going to play a massive role, isn't it? On the insurance side, the climate risk piece. I don't think businesses have really tapped into, you know, in terms of the conversation today of value, but there's also a major risk component here that you can't actually get your property insured because of certain climate risk, flooding, wildfires, loss of energy. I think we're going to see more and more insurance companies incentivizing, take these actions and we'll give you a discounted premium, as it were.
So, final kind of opportunity. Any comments you'd like to make? What do you want to share with this great group?
I would say it's never too late to get started, and there's a ton of free resources. I think it's a really important time to support the Department of Energy that is literally like free consultants. So I would highly recommend their tools, Energy Star Portfolio Manager, but also their Better tool, which is for decarbonization planning. Happy to talk about that. But I would say there's a lot that you can do that won't cost you anything, but a little bit of time and curiosity.
Yeah, I think I just echo that, right? I think it's digging in a little bit, knowing what you don't know, and then finding the right group of partners to go work with depending upon the business model to understand, hey, where are there pockets of opportunity? And then ultimately bringing those quickly, right, to the forefront, testing them out, and then validating that hypothesis. Is there value here? If no, okay, is there another pocket of opportunity somewhere else?
I'd say without energy, our businesses don't operate. And the reality today is energy demand is going through the roof. The grid can't handle it. And the opportunity cost for businesses is the moment you want to add robots to your facility, electrify your fleet, change out gas boilers for electric, suddenly you're told by the utility come back in 3 to 7 years because we've got to upgrade a transformer that is not available in the market. And that is a massive opportunity cost. And the businesses that actually read the tea leaves, innovate, predict, they're the ones that win. And we need to ensure that we have access to affordable, clean, reliable power at scale. And so we need to get ahead of that. We need to use our built environment, maximize its potential, and then we all win, because if we actually create these outcomes, not only does it diminish the risk for the utility to have to build these assets, which ensures that all of our rates stay competitive. Today, every time the utility invests, our personal rates go up, our business rates go up, and that's not good for our economy, it's not good for our society. So yeah, that would be my ask, is get proactive, get on the front foot, and don't let the market dictate what your business should look like.
Yeah, sure. I think generally we've given a ton of examples. There's more and more we go on. Like, I think sustainability is good business value, and there's plenty of reasons for that. I think we just have to keep in mind that people who are not at this conference and outside of this world it gets very complicated and don't understand this stuff. So you just need to keep it super simple and clear when you're trying to communicate your message to other groups.
All right, I'm going to close out with 3 thank yous. First of all, the Super South team, it's been such a great event. I'd like to thank this distinguished panel, and I'd like to thank each of you for being here and being part of this community and this ecosystem that we're building and just doing all that you can. So thank you very much.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible, and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks, and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.